Hello and welcome. This is Michael Beach, and you're dialed into the What Are You Doing podcast. This is the show for thought leaders who know they need to be investing now in the next generation of leadership for their organization. This is also the show for any of you who want to become a leader at the front of that next generation. You know, the one that's going to change the world for the better and lead your team or your company to great success. All of us here at Michael Beach Coaching and Consulting are excited about being engaged in the business of helping forward-thinking, fast-growth companies to develop and cultivate great leaders at all levels of their companies. We're especially excited today to have the opportunity to introduce you to today's special guest, my friend and an extraordinary leader, Robert Sher. Robert, how are you today?
Doing well, thank you. Getting up early here in California and getting ready to finish the week strong.
That's great. Well, I'd like to give the audience a little bit of information about you, if you don't mind. I hope that this won't make you feel awkward in any way, because you're quite a guy. I just want the listeners to know all this good stuff about you. So as I mentioned before, listeners, my guest today is Robert Sher. He is the founding principal of CEO to CEO, a consulting firm of former chief executives that improves the leadership infrastructure of mid-sized companies seeking to accelerate their performance. He was chief executive of Bentley Publishing Group from 1984 to 2006, and he steered that firm to become a leading player in its industry, the industry of decorative art publishing. Robert speaks frequently and has published extensively on the successful leadership traits and skills of CEOs at mid-sized companies. He's a regular columnist on Forbes.com, and he authored his first book, The Feel of the Deal, How I Built a Company Through Acquisitions, back in 2007. He's published numerous posts for the Harvard Business Review online and articles for many other publications. He also publishes his own newsletter, The CEO Insomnia Factor. As if that wasn't enough, he also recently took the helm of a business planning software company as the CEO. Robert, my gosh, you've got a lot of sticks in the fire, my friend.
I do. It keeps me hopping.
I would imagine you got to be one of the busiest guys in the industry. Well, tell us a little bit about each of the companies that you're leading at the moment.
Sure. Well, CEO to CEO is of course how we met, and it's coaching and consulting business, and it really helps mid-sized businesses get through their teenage years. They go from small with one strong leader telling a bunch of helpers what to do, but when they cross 5, 10, 20, 30 million, you really have to have a team of leaders. And without that team, growth gets stunted. And so we help those companies figure out the kinds of changes they have to make, often around emerging leaders and a broadened leadership team and process, so they can keep growing through that time frame. And then the one-page business plan company is a tool we use for many years, and it's a tool that helps in exactly that transition. Very simple but powerful business planning.
Wonderful. Now, as you and I were preparing for today's episode, you mentioned to me that emerging leaders might well want to go to the website for one-page business plans and take a look at some of your tools and consider implementing them. Can you kind of walk the audience through that?
Absolutely. So, the one-page business plan has been a best-selling book for 25 years. And it's a powerful, simple methodology to get really clear about what the most important things are that any leader should function in. And one of the sad things we see so often is that great emerging leaders say, well, my boss hasn't given me a clear plan. I'm not clear on what I'm going to do, and I need more clarity. And there's a small handful of them that say, well, if my boss isn't going to give it to me, I'm going to give it to myself. And they can use the one-page business plan format and book to sit down and say, well, here's what I think I should do. Here's what I think my most important priority should be. And I'll put that in front of my boss and say, boss, is that it? And if it's not, great, let's change it. And then they can navigate themselves to the plan they created. You can use a one-page plan by yourself on paper to create your own focus and deliver those results. And it's a great step.
What a fantastic idea. I just love the idea that you're empowering those emerging leaders to kind of take command and take control for themselves, to not sit around and wait for somebody to give them guidance. Go ahead and ask for feedback on the guidance you're assuming they might want you to follow. Great idea. Rob, I know that you're a music fan. Would you mind telling our audience a little bit about who's your favorite band or your favorite artist?
Elton John has always been something that just captured my mind and spirit. The song, the tone, not so much the words, although many of them just very poetic. I've always loved it.
That's great. I share a deep love for Elton John along with you. And he's a tremendous performer, Hall of Fame member. I lost count how many top 40 hits that guy wrote with Bernie Taupin as lyricist. But it's got to be 40 or 50 that made it to the top 40 over the years. Quite a dynamic guy.
Yeah.
Rob, what's the best business or leadership book you've ever had your hands on?
The one that always jumps to mind is Warren Bennis, and he's written a number of them. On Leadership is one of them. But when I was young and trying to figure out for myself, what does it mean to be a leader and why aren't some things working for me? When I would read his books, literally, I would read a chapter and write several paragraphs of takeaways and just did that. And much of his teachings have really formed who I am. And so it's my go-to leadership author.
That's great. Wonderful. Yeah, I've read some of his stuff. The guy has a very, very common sense approach to leadership that resonates with an awful lot of people. Marvelous. Thank you for sharing that with us. At what point in your life or in your career, Rob, did you become interested in leadership?
So, my start was with a business that four of us founded called Bentley Publishing Group. We published artwork, kind of like that print that's right behind me. And so we grew it from very small, and then it got bigger, and then I had to be a leader because I couldn't do everything myself, and I got to the point where I couldn't just have helpers that did stuff for me. And it's really frustrating when you've got opportunity and you want to grow beyond it, but you need people to step up. That's called leadership, and that's when I got interested. How do I get them to know which direction to go and to be motivated and to figure stuff out so I didn't have to figure everything out? That was the moment when I knew I had to be a better leader in order to succeed. And, it's funny, when I met my wife 29 years ago, we went to an event, sort of a self-help event, a free little taste. I've forgotten his name. He's a really tall guy with a deep voice. And he had us all pull out a sheet of paper and write down like 5 guiding lights for our lives. And one of those was to be a great leader. And that's when I was probably 28, 29. And so it was even at that point, as I was an early entrepreneur, that I knew that was important. Tony Robbins.
Yes, Tony Robbins. Fantastic. Well, I found it interesting when you and I were preparing for today's episode. You mentioned one of the things that has kind of been a hallmark of your career is that you've always kind of been the guy in whatever organization you were in that was willing to dive into the hardest problems and figure out how to solve them. That's pretty good on-the-job training, isn't it?
It is. And, and maybe it's my personality. I'm a pragmatist. I want to figure it out. I want to do what helps us make progress. And I'm not addicted to being that guy. If there's some other guy that can dive in there and figure it out faster, that makes us go further faster, which is awesome. But for me, it's the ultimate fun to go in as someone and figure out how to make progress, what to do. And I don't get scared by lack of clarity. I'll read books, I'll ask people, I'll scratch and claw around. I've been called an animal at times in a positive way. And that I'm aggressive and scratch and what do we have to do and turn it upside down and until there's something to try. And then we go do it. And I failed a ton of times, but you learn a lot. And if you do that over and over again, pretty soon you have this amazing set of skills and you're not quite sure how it happened. And you didn't go to school and they didn't teach you all that stuff. But you learn by doing and experimenting.
Yeah, it's kind of like the school of hard knocks, right? You just go out there and figure out how to make things better. Fantastic. Well, I'm curious if you had any leadership mentors along the way. Are there any people that you'd like to kind of call out that were instrumental in shaping you as you developed as a great leader?
There's been a number of them. And, the two that jump out, one's a guy named John Weld, and he's still with us, and he was our lawyer for a while, but very, very wise, could sort of see through all the legal stuff to the underlying real problems. And, there were plenty of times when things seemed to be all lost that John would calm me down. That was one. Another one was someone that we actually hired and brought on as the head of sales. I'm kind of more of a quieter guy, an operations guy, had really never been the sales guy. And he was an outside guy, very different than me. Writes things down on a paper napkin, not buttoned down, hugs everybody, kind of a old-time sales guy. And much as we had our challenges, he really taught me about relationships and the outside world and how to do that. And I could tell you a funny story that comes to mind if there's time. And
sure.
A big aha.
Yeah, tell us the story. We'd love it.
So we got to a point, we were 6 million revenues and our growth stopped. And Jim said, well, we're so big now, it's hard to keep growing. And I just said, no, I don't buy that. And he said, well, then come on out with me. And I really had been inside running the operation, but I had enough leaders in place to do that. I started going on trips with him, and I'd tag along and would witness the warmth and the power that he had. Well, we went to this one guy named Mike Whittingham, I still remember, in L.A., it's like 25 years ago or longer. And, hey, Mike, and I was trying to be outgoing. Hey, Mike, we're here to sell you something, and smiled. And Mike just turned to me and he said, Rob, you're not going to sell me anything. I don't get sold. I buy. And it was like, bam, this awakening. It was, hard to take and a little embarrassing.
Sure.
But that has stuck with me forever. That was a huge lesson. And then not to order Chinese food in Houston 25 years ago. Jim gave me the choice of Mexican or Chinese. I like Chinese food, so I chose Chinese. That was the wrong choice in Houston at that point.
I've spent a lot of time in Houston, and barbecue and seafood are my two favorite go-tos down there, along with, of course, Tex-Mex or Mexican food.
Exactly.
Well, I have to imagine, Rob, that a dynamic leader like yourself has got to be making investments in yourself from time to time to become a better leader. Could you share with our listeners what you're doing to raise the level of your leadership game lately?
Yes, and we call it research now. I didn't have a fancy name for it before, and it started in the ramp up to the second book, Mighty Midsized Companies, probably 7 or 8 years ago. But much as we consult with many companies and we help them and we bring them smart ideas, everybody we consult with is doing something really smart as well. And so we actively reach out and try to find people who are doing something exceptional, something leading in their area. And we interview them and we record those interviews. I digest them, we transcribe them, and that's the basis for all the writing that I do. And so you're reaching out, you're finding people with great ideas, you're writing up a prescription around that and understanding of that, which actually codifies it and burns it into my mind. If you just read, it's hard to get it to all stick. And then, of course, that goes out as thought leadership. It gets published, which helps others. But it's that process of always saying, what's new? Who's doing something amazing? And then having some structure around it. That's what we do.
Fantastic. You mentioned one of my favorite books, one that you happen to have written a few years back, Mighty Midsized Companies. It's a great little book. For anybody who has not picked up a copy of it, I think there are still copies available via Amazon.com and a number of other sellers. And I make it a practice to give that book as a gift from time to time to a lot of my mid-sized clients who are on that fast growth trajectory, because I want to keep them on that fast growth trajectory, right? My favorite thing about that book is the section where you talked about leadership infrastructure, because leadership's kind of one of my passions, of course, right? Any thoughts that you have about, what you'd like our listeners to understand about the 4 elements of leadership infrastructure?
I think, I could go on about that forever. And, one of them is quality leaders. That's one of the four. And there's three
Absolutely.
others, and they're all important.
Yeah, I can remind you what the other ones are if I stumped you there. I didn't mean to call that out of the blue, but
no, you did.
You mentioned quality leadership is one of the four. Planning and governance processes is another one. Information gathering and the acumen to do good analytics. And then finally, the fourth element is effective internal communications at the right rhythm.
Right. And absolutely. And you didn't stump me on that, Michael, but I was focusing on the quality leaders, and they're all tied together. Mm-hmm. But, when I look at all of our clients and look at the high potentials of the emerging leaders, if they've got the energy and the will and they're pulling, the rest of that stuff can come. It can be learned. But I think that quality leader, are you the kind of leader that can help take your company forward to the next level? And if not, what do you have to do differently?
I have to give you a tremendous amount of credit when I share your book with any of my clients that I'm coaching on a regular basis, and they start to implement some of the ideas that you've put into this fantastic book, Mighty Midsized Companies. One of the key things that we spend a lot of time discussing is the importance of putting that leadership infrastructure into place. In my experience, there are just way too many small and almost medium-sized companies that haven't put enough thought and enough structure in place to really set up their leadership for success, right? They kind of come at that later. It's almost like the cobbler's kids' shoes. They're always the ones with holes in the soles.
Right.
And if you want to be a great company, you really have to make it a priority to put that leadership and infrastructure in place early enough so that you can reap the benefits when you really want to get on that growth trajectory.
Really true. Well said.
Well, as you've developed leaders in the various organizations that you've led over the years, Rob, have you come to some conclusions about maybe 2 or 3 changes you might call out that aspiring emerging leaders could make to improve their leadership?
Yes. I think one is to do your research and homework when you run into a problem there is so much out there. So I'm talking about a Google search and reading 5 articles on it. It's amazing what you can find. In the old days, you had to go to the library. You don't really have to do that. So I think that is one, absolutely. I think the second thing is to leave your ego at the door and listen. You can go a long time without saying what your opinion is as you collect and understand the environment and everybody else's thoughts and opinions. And when you do move, you'll probably be more right on, and you can be far more strategic. And so being the last guy to speak in a room often is really, really powerful.
Right.
And I think the third thing would be to figure out how to help your boss each day. Is there something you can take off his or her plate, something you can do that was his or her job that gives him or her time to move up and do something more difficult or more challenging? Because that is sending a signal, if you do it well, of course, that you're ready and you're helpful. And maybe after a year's time, you're doing 30% of what your boss used to do. Guess what? Your boss might get promoted because they've been doing what their boss was doing, and you might follow in. Those are the 3 things that come to mind.
Oh, marvelous. I've noticed that sometimes somebody who's moving up the leadership ladder, an aspiring emerging leader, can get stuck by some obstacles or some barriers. Have you noticed any particular obstacles or barriers that get in the way of some of your emerging leader clients?
Yeah. Usually it's that they're waiting. They're waiting to be told, waiting to get the approval to go forward. And my boss hasn't let me, and my boss this or that. And that's a state of mind. And yes, there can be terrible bosses who are horrible and hold you back and just run away and go get a good boss. But for the most part, there's many times when you just have to be a little pushier and say, I want to do that, or raise your hand and do something that's not in your job description, but it shows leadership, and you're grabbing at your future. You're grabbing an opportunity and pulling it in. That's such a loud signal, and so often people wait.
Yeah, I've noticed the same thing. I talk all the time to emerging leaders who are waiting for something, and I ask them, what are you waiting for exactly? And it's guidance, direction, feedback, permission, whatever. And I say, well, why don't you stop waiting and just go ask for some feedback? Make a suggestion and say, am I out of my mind, or should I maybe start thinking about doing this? Your boss will say one of 3 replies, either yes, no, or maybe. And away you go. You're no longer waiting. Do you feel the old saying holds true? Are there born leaders, or do you think that virtually anyone can develop their leadership ability if they try?
I think if you believe you can be a leader or want to be a leader, if you want it, you can absolutely develop it and get better. But Michael, I got to say, there's a lot of people that aren't sure they want to be a leader. They'd rather be an expert.
Sure.
They'd rather be something else. And that is completely okay. And there are those people, and they are incredibly valuable in the right role. But if you say, my dream is to be a better leader, I want to step up, I want to go in that direction, absolutely you can do it.
Oh, that's a great point. Yeah. I mean, not everybody has to be a leader. Some people are very, very comfortable following, and nothing wrong with that whatsoever.
You can have a technical leader who is leading their field in a specific area, who isn't a leader of people, but they're a leader in knowledge. And right. Is that person a follower? Maybe not, but they're not leading people. And right. That's a noble direction, as is being a great follower.
Yeah, I agree. There's lots of different ways to kind of peel the onion, aren't there? How important is emotional intelligence to anyone who wants to become a great leader?
It's paramount. You can be so smart and so talented, but if people don't like you, if you can't understand how to get them to want what you want, if you piss them off regularly, you will fail as a leader. I was just on a call yesterday with a client who has a young leader who super bright. I've seen her assessment. She is super bright, but she loses her cool and gets frustrated and reads people the riot act, and it's just not going to go well. And what great opportunity lost. Emotional intelligence is crucial, which can also be developed if you really want to, but it's going to mean mastering some of your own demons sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. The key, I think, for a lot of emerging leaders is just to recognize first and foremost that emotional intelligence is a valuable priority that you need to be aware of. It needs to show up on your radar. And once it does, it's easy enough to get yourself an assessment that'll help you figure out where you're at today. And by working together with a coach like Rob or any of the other hundreds or thousands of coaches that are available around the United States, you can get yourself set on a very powerful upward trajectory. And I'm noticing that a lot of clients are able to increase their emotional intelligence scores by 8, 10, 12 percentage points in a period of time, like 6 months or so. And everyone around them notices. So it's kind of a secret weapon that I wish more people would make a priority.
For sure.
Well, you're obviously investing a lot of time and energy in yourself, Rob, over the years to become a great leader. Can you identify for us the best single leadership development investment you ever made in yourself?
The single best one ever is reading lots of books, and I don't do as much as I would like to now. Reading is the cheapest form of learning. There is so many of the best practices are written, and 95% of what every leader needs is already figured out somewhere. Mm-hmm. And if you're willing to read and really reflect, and for me at least, I would read and take notes. It's you just go too fast and breeze through it. It's not that kind of introspection, but when you write notes, at least for me, it burns it in. Hugely important. I'm going to give you one more. That I wish I had done earlier, and I've done it subsequently, is a 360, right? Where you send out a survey to people above you and your peers and your subordinates, and you get feedback. And coaches like you and I, Michael, we do this all the time. Everyone's afraid of them. No one loves to do them. But you learn so much because what people think of you is like air currents in a room. You can't really see them or tell. And it's very hard to know how people perceive you and thus what you should change if you never have asked them. And those 360s, even though they can hurt, are just such a big eye opener. It helps you self-correct.
Yeah, another great example why asking others for feedback is so incredibly valuable, right? Because we all wonder, what is everybody else thinking about me? Do they think I'm nuts? Do they think I'm lazy? Do they think I'm foolish? And you won't know until you ask. And a 360 assessment is an awesome way to get real clear real quickly about how you're perceived by your teammates. Excellent suggestion. What would you like to recommend to our audience today about investing in others that might help them to develop or accelerate their development as a leader?
That's interesting. It's funny. It feels almost circular, Michael, because being a leader, in my opinion, is defined by a book that's called Servant Leadership. A great leader serves others. And and so when you are helping develop others, that is the act of leading, right? That is the act of leading. And you can't call yourself a leader if you're not developing others. You're just a boss telling orders and giving out orders. For me, here's the big prize, and maybe it's because I'm a little further along on my career than perhaps many of our listeners, is that it's cool to be a leader of people, but to be a leader of leaders so that your subordinates are leading other leaders. The leverage is huge. You get to work with such amazing people. And with a small little idea, right, or a little touch, you've got 4 leaders stepping up their game, the ability to create good in the world. Or if you're just about money, okay, the ability to make your company perform better and make more money. It's hugely rewarding and very, very interesting work.
I couldn't agree with you more. As you were talking, I was thinking about a guy who's probably as well known a developer of leaders as there is on this planet, John Maxwell. He started out many, many years ago to try to create 1 million leaders in this world. And I think at last count, they were up to like 5 or 6 million that have gotten free training from Maxwell, because Maxwell trains leaders, and his ask of those leaders is, okay, now turn around and develop, 2 or 3 people yourself. And it's been going on now long enough that it's literally making a profound difference all the way across the globe. Pretty exciting.
Cool.
All right, Rob, my final question for you today. You've got a really distinguished record of developing high-performing teams. Would love to hear your thoughts about teamwork and collaboration in the workplace. Do you have any observations about how best to develop strong teamwork and collaboration on a team?
I do, and again, it's what little piece of that, what I share today. I think the most important one is that those companies we work with that are amazing at teamwork, everyone has this attitude of how can I help? Like, no matter what position you play on their leadership team, if somebody else is in trouble, hey, I can help with that. Oh, I can give you some insights. And what happens is when that gets very close to or at 100%, everybody seems to be more interested in helping each other win than themselves. Nobody is like, I want to win. I want to get my bonus. I want my department to be the one who hits the top more than you guys. That's an inward focus, right? That's all about me. And that's destructive because you get too much of that going. And then pretty soon it's like, well, why should I be helping everyone else when all they're interested in is helping themselves? I better look out for number one. And we get silos and the opposite of teamwork.
Right.
So there's a cultural aspect to that. And what's wonderful is that if I'm Mr. Excel genius, which I'm not, but I'm not bad, and I'm helping my peers with their Excel, but I can't write, they're helping me writing, right? We trade off our strengths and we get strengths going across the team. We also get no fear. So everyone's willing to ask, hey, I could use some help over here, right? And they get it, knowing that they've been giving help with their strengths. And that's what locks a team, makes them cohesive, and makes them drive. And so the thought is, are you, every listener, are you truly in your heart wanting to help your peers win? And is that shared throughout your team? If not, can you start doing that? Can you help with that? And hopefully, if there's someone who is really stuck on being selfish, there's a way to get them out. And I hope that your boss understands that and understands this notion around teamwork. But that's where the teams sort of hit their peak. When they've got that, how can I help culture spread all the way around?
Yeah. Very important to have that team first mentality, isn't it? If it's me first, we're going to get into trouble real quickly. But if I'm always putting my teammates up ahead of my interests, we're going to be okay 9 times out of 10 in my experience, or maybe 10 times out of 10.
Right.
Well, Rob, thank you so very much for contributing your time, your energy, and your stories to the What Are You Doing listeners today. We sure appreciate it. I hope you'll want to come back and join us again on What Are You Doing somewhere down the road. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Michael. Have a good one.
Well, that's our show for today, gang. That's our episode. If you come back in a couple of weeks and join us for our next episode, our guest is going to be Mr. Ben Tice, the founder, the CEO, and president of Skoll Marketing, a Twin Cities-based marketing firm that is on a fast growth trajectory. We hope you'll come back and join us again soon. Thanks. This is Michael Beach saying farewell for today for the What Are You Doing podcast. See you next time.